Hello again and welcome to The Luxury of Choice, a B2B sales and business podcast brought to you by the training team of George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan, I'm a senior sales trainer at George James and I'm also the host and producer of this podcast. And I'm joined by my colleagues and also senior sales trainers, Pru Layton and Jayne Green with me today. And we're going somewhere a little bit different today with our podcast. This is going to be a bit more of a personal reflection on our respective sales careers. It might imply how old some of us are on this podcast as well. Perhaps we won't go there into too much detail on that part of it. But what we thought we'd do as part of our sort of wind down towards the end of our series, of our second series of the podcast, is really looking back on things that we wished we'd known before we started our sales career, or perhaps we'd wish somebody had told us before we started our sales career, which certainly in my case was a long time ago. So sales is a great job and it's a lot of fun most of the time, but there's also things that we perhaps could have known before we actually signed on the dotted line for our first sales job. Let's start with you, Jayne, on this one. So looking back on your sales career, when you first got into sales, I guess you were like most of us, you were in the lab to start with and then got a sales job as well. Oh no, yours was slightly different, wasn't it?
No, me. No, I'm the dark side, basically.
Yeah, that's right. Of course you were, yeah.
Business management. So that was like everybody's boo. So I worked for a company, and I worked for a company internally to start with, and then thought, I don't think I want to do this. I'm seeing all these really exciting reps in suits coming in and out of this place. And I'm really excited because I was all about the idea of strategy and making business and what this looked like. And so I very soon got the opportunity, and I was given I think they took a real risk on me, is what I think, because I think I was quite young and naive. And I got an opportunity. I went and asked, of course, to say, this is what I really want to do. What are the options? A few days later, I got a message to go and see one of the sales managers, and he offered me a job selling in London. And I'm like, whoa, winner. And you get a car? What is this? Because we didn't get a phone in those days, going back. But I loved it. But so for me, it was just like, this is really exciting, because I'd seen all of these other people having what I thought were a great time. They seemed very professional. They seemed to know what they were talking about. They were out, not stuck in an office. They were seeing people all the time and having some great conversations. And I thought I'd like a bit of that life. And so you got a car, and it was a win for me. It meant that my battered up old car, I could actually get rid of.
And your first sales territory, you were saying before we started, was in London, yeah?
It was London, yes. It was one of the things that I wish I'd have known would have been how to drive effectively whilst holding a map of London. Normally, like balance it on the steering wheel as you did. If I'd have known that before and practiced it, then I wouldn't have had quite so many bumps in that company car.
Please don't drive that way, dear listener, if you're listening to us.
We didn't have sat-navs then, so just saying.
No. Yeah, it's amazing how you rely on it. What was your first sales job, Pru? What was your route into sales?
I was just thinking, Jay, maybe you should have done the knowledge thing.
I should have done the knowledge.
Yeah.
London taxi drivers test about how to get anywhere in London. If you'd done the knowledge as part of your sales training, you'd have been like lethal. Would have been great.
Absolutely.
I came the classic route, Steve. So I went into sales, not because I wanted to, because I wanted to run away from the lab. So what I wish I'd known before I came into sales was what a fabulous job it was going to be. Because I would love to say it was a positive choice like Jayne's, and it wasn't at all. It was the idea of spending another 5 years in the lab filled me with horror, to be perfectly honest. I thought I'd be breaking the frontiers of science on a regular basis, and basically I was doing the same old thing and then washing up my glassware. And I was just like, oh, this is what life holds for me. So I was lucky enough that a job came up on the board where I worked for a company that sells laboratory reagents and consumables. So you can work it out, dear listener, which one that might have been, was my first job. And yeah, I just applied for it, not from a positive, but from a totally negative point of view. I can't believe my first sales manager actually gave me the job. I don't know what answers I gave. They wouldn't have been good ones. But a bit like you, Jayne, you took a risk on me. And from the very start, I thought, wow, this was fabulous. It was like being my own boss. And I was in my 20s, pretty naive. And suddenly I had all this responsibility and I loved it. I loved the control, realised, knew just how much you're in charge of your own destiny. It was brilliant.
Fabulous. So mine was very similar, really. I was in the lab. I was a research chemist. I was working on novel fungicides. which sounds really exciting, but when you've done the same reaction like 100 times with a slightly different starting material, it got a bit routine, really. And yeah, like both of you, really, these people were coming into the lab in suits and trying to sell us things. And I thought I could do that. And I had a role model in all seriousness. I still have an uncle who's in retirement age now, but at the time was quite a senior business manager within the company I work for. And in fact, I shared with you both recently the advert that was in Farmers Weekly that showed him, it was 1970, I think it was, with his customers, really. And so his route was in sales through the same company, although my sales job meant I had to leave that company. But yeah, I think it was knowing the lack of structure, looking back on it now, was terrifying at the time, because you're used to turning up in the lab and you turn on your fume cupboard, go and get a cup of coffee, sit down, do your work, go home and forget about it. Whereas sales is nothing like that. Sales is entirely what you put into it is what you get out of it, really. So for that first year of my first sort of job was more of a sales support role. So I was providing application support, technical support for existing customers in a water treatment company in central London. So I was exactly the same, trying to find my way around central London. I'd only been driving for a year, I think. And I think I had 6 bumps in my first year in London. But looking back on it now, I wish I'd perhaps have embraced a little bit more. I was quite nervous of the whole sort of lack of structure, really. I could see it as a big opportunity, but I also was frightened of it all, really, at the time, really. And I had some advice from one of the existing salespeople who took me under his wing and said, what do you think is the most important thing to do? Make sure your customers are happy all the time, or make sure your company's happy all the time. And I thought the right answer has got to be the customer. And reflecting on that now, I probably wouldn't have said that. I'd have said both. Because there's the old phrase, the customer is always right. Sometimes they aren't not quite as right as they think they are, but that's perhaps another topic for another day. So yeah, I think we're all very similar. We got our first sales job. We all felt empowered. Without getting into specifics of our careers, details, unless you want to go into that, but would there be anything you would have done differently looking back on that time, or anything you would have perhaps gone a different way of doing the things that you did at the time? What were your thoughts on that, Jayne?
I was thinking about this earlier, and if I had have understood back then that preparation was so important and planning, I'd have saved myself so much hassle. Charging around London, not knowing where I'm going, trying to think. I thought that I was, I don't know, trying to win the world. It was like this. It was an exciting moment. It was exhilarating, but I didn't have much of a plan. And I was starting to tear around and didn't quite know how to get and see people and all of that. So I did actually, I had to take a step back. I was loving it and just asked the team that I was on and the team of people within a company that was probably a competitor to the company that Pru worked for. We were probably competing against each other, and there were some really mature salespeople on there. And I just said, how do you get everything done? And one of the guys that was on there that retired actually in my time there was just like, you've got to have a plan. You've got to have a plan, and you've got to spend some time in your week planning out what that week's going to look for. And I hadn't realized that because I was just so excited to be driving around everywhere and seeing people. And I hadn't realized that at the beginning. If I'd have understood that preparation is the key to pretty much everything you do, that would have been really helpful.
Great points. Of course, we talked about that in our last episode with regards to managing your territory. Pru, anything that you would have done differently at that time with hindsight?
I think, unlike you, Jayne, I might have listened to some of the more mature salespeople instead of thinking that I knew better, because I was probably a bit bolshy, whatever the word is.
No, perish your thought, Pru. That kind of matter.
Leopard never changes its spots. Yeah, I think I probably did not listen and spend time with those people who'd covered the territory for longer. We had a lot of coverage because it was a catalogue company. And so I think we had something like 30 or 40 salespeople covering the UK. And so there was a lot of massive experience. And I remember looking at the people who were in their fees and thinking, what do they know? So I think seeking best practice inside my own organisation and having an open mind, I should have done differently, because I genuinely thought they didn't know what they were doing. And because I come out of a lab, I felt I was probably my experience was more relevant than theirs, and it was not true. So yeah, being a bit of a know-it-all might still be a bit like that now. Who knows?
No, not at all. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I remember thinking a couple of times early in my sales career, because it was all chemicals really. I was in boiler houses and air conditioning systems and all that. I think, I'm a chemist. What am I doing all this kind of stuff for? I'm more important than this. I should be doing something a bit more academic. But the thing is, nobody would give me a job in lab sales because I had no experience. So I had to get my first job to get the sort of the knowledge, if you like, of doing the job really. And one of the things I looked back on now and I realized how important it was at the time. And I'm not just saying this because we work in training, but the importance of sales training, because I hadn't got a clue what selling meant really. I thought, this was perhaps the culture of the organization I worked for. And this was the 80s, dear listener. So it was a slightly different time, but it was very much a culture of get in, get the order number and get out again. And that was what it was, the kind of mentality really. Whereas what I learned when I had some professional sales training is that selling isn't trying to convince people to buy things they don't want or trick people or to trap people or some kind of underhand technique. It's all about helping people. It's all about helping people do what they want to achieve with their careers and their jobs really. And that was a massive learning point for me quite early on in my career, and hopefully one that I've stuck to ever since really. What was your sort of training background with that? Again, naming companies, what was your personal sales training? And Jayne, did you get sales training quite early?
Yes, in that company, they used to have internal training and internal trainers that were there for a period of time. And then that obviously moved away and they brought other people in. And for me, actually, within those first 3 to 4 years, I realised I loved training. And so for me, that kind of started as a
Receiving
spark
training, you mean?
yeah, receiving training,
Yeah.
receiving it. I thought, well, this is brilliant. And you saw the good, the bad and the ugly of it, didn't you? I remember being in some training that I just thought, gosh, I'm not quite sure what that was about. But then really starting to embrace actually, how could I improve? And I think of it like Pru. Sometimes we think when we get that confidence burst and that rush that we've got with the enthusiasm and excitement, I felt like I was unstoppable, but I realised I actually knew very little. So I remember my first round of training and thinking, oh, wow, there's a lot to this. There's more to this than I actually thought about. I love that. I think one of the things for me, so that I remember early on, they were talking about finding the right people, but also it's not about, so I went into selling and I remember somebody saying, because I used to talk a lot, still do, they said, you'll be okay in selling. You've got the gift of the gab, Jayne. And I'm like, that's a really weird saying. And I wish I realised it wasn't about that when I first started. We talk about talking a lot. Actually, it's so much more about being curious and listening to be effective. And I didn't understand that right at the beginning. So I wish I'd known that.
Same here. Yeah, I remember going to see customers when I did get a job eventually in lab sales, again with a catalogue type business, almost going in to see the customer and saying, here's a catalogue, and on page 1 we have this product, and on page 2 we have this product, and on page 3. And by page 10 the customer's eyes are rolling. And yeah, I've been slightly facetious, but I think you get the point.
Yeah.
Pru, your thoughts on this about training, the importance of training?
So much the same. I honestly thought that sales, I was lucky to get sales training. I think when you joined an organisation with a big sales team in a very competitive space where actually there was very little differentiation, and it was about the salespeople as to how you won the business, because you could get as good a service from anybody else with products, sometimes even the same products from a different supplier.
True.
You had to make the difference. So within 2 months of joining, I had a sales training course and I was amazed. I was thinking, I just thought it was talking people into submission.
Yes.
Genuinely. I thought that's what you did. I thought if you just keep, and I have to say, occasionally that did work.
Yeah.
Can recall some of the looks where they thought, I'll just buy something to make her go away. I wouldn't say it's great for a long-term relationship.
Probably not for repeat business.
It took me a decade or so to work out, I'm sad to say, that what I really had to work on was listening better. I was always curious. I never had a problem with being curious.
Yeah.
Same here.
But it was always about jumping in rather than really giving, particularly some of the quieter customers, that space to speak their minds, getting comfortable with a bit of silence while like reading that being comfortable enough in yourself that you give the customer the space to be themselves.
Yeah.
And I recall one of my early visits to this customer in a medical research institute in London. And he was a very shy, quietly spoken customer. And we went up to his office and I was loud, jumpy, throwing my arms around. And I have this image of him curling up into a ball until I left. I must have terrified him. I really wasn't reading the clues. I wasn't giving him space. I wasn't. Yeah. So I wish I'd realised what a sort of job there is in sales of being an actor. I think
that's a great way of looking at it. Yeah.
You have to, it is a bit of a show. You can't just say, this is me and that's the way I am. That's not okay in sales. Being able to read the person, read the room, read the situation and adapt who you are is so important in sales. I wish I'd realised that instead of just talking people into submission and getting an order so that I'd leave the room and never come back.
Such a great point. Totally, I usually think it was like loading programs. I'm going to load this program now before I go into the customer. And this customer, I need to be quiet, reflective. For this customer, I need to be a bit more bubbly and whatever. Yeah, and it's having a bit of emotional intelligence as well, really, in recognizing the person on the other side of the table. Any sort of examples of things that perhaps you would have done differently in terms of a particular customer or a particular call? And again, obviously, don't name the situation. Any sort of big learning point from a particular sales call? I perhaps should have given you a chance to think about that before I dropped the question on you. But can you think back on anything that, with hindsight, was a big learning point?
I was lucky enough to have a great manager called Robert. He'll know who he was. He was my first manager. And I remember going to see one of my really important customers. I got an appointment with the head of buying procurement guy. I had this appointment and he was well known. I didn't realise that at the time, to give you like a really early appointment. So he knew that you had to set out at the crack of dawn. And when you got there, he would then make you wait outside his office while he did other things. And I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, driven for 2 hours, got in to see him and he kept me waiting. And I got in to see him eventually and he kept on taking calls while I was trying to speak to him. I'd been waiting. I'd got this appointment. It'd been like 6 weeks out. I'd driven for miles. I was really pleased with myself. I'd prepped really well because people said he was very tough. And frankly, when I got in front of him, he was just rude. And I took it on the chin, which was not okay. And eventually I got to the stage, actually, where he was just constantly taking calls. So I stood up with my heart racing and I said, look, it seems that you're super busy today. So I'm just going to leave you to it and we'll book another time. And I walked out and I thought, I think I've just ruined one of our biggest accounts. So I went to a phone box because we didn't have mobile phones. So I got to a phone box and I rang my boss. I went, Robert, I think I've just done an awful thing. And actually, I wish I'd realised that I'd just done the right thing because I actually earned this guy's respect. So the next time I went there, he remembered me and he actually gave me his full attention.
Brilliant.
I think I wish I'd realised that you're not there. You talked about the customer always being right. And is that right? I think it's driving for that peer-to-peer relationship that
great point.
If you're with the right customer, you can help them and they can help you. It's this mutual relationship, not the customer says, I want this, and you run around and try and make it happen, even though it's not ideal. And I wish I'd understood that earlier. I think I would have had better conversations and I'd have been of more value to the customers as well as them being of more value to me if I'd worked that out.
I think that is such an important point because we've often had the same academic background as our customer, same qualifications, possibly even similar experience. We've just gone a different route in our career. We've gone down a commercial route. They've gone down a more technical route. And we are their equal, really. We should never fear or feel that as a salesperson that we're some, I don't know, using the words advisedly, but we're not some underhand role or whatever. We've got a very important role and our job is generally there to help our customers do their work quicker, faster, more efficiently, whatever. So just recognizing that we have that sort of, not right, I think it's too strong a word, but we have a relationship, as you described, Pru, where mutual respect, mutual understanding, mutual tolerance is something that should go on, really. We're not doing anything underhand or anything sneaky because we're in sales, really. Anything from you, Jayne, on this one?
Yeah, I think, I look back into some of those very early years and with some key accounts and important customers, I think they had me running around in circles after them. And I didn't apply what Pru did. I wish I'd understood that actually I could have had that confidence to say, you're really busy now, or I need to schedule that in at a time that works. And I didn't have maybe that confidence or that understanding. And it's that part taking that ownership and control within your area to actually manage your customers and what you're doing and your job really well. I didn't understand. I think I went out. I think I went from my first day, I went out running, charging excitedly, and then realized that you trip over. And then you need to work out. But there is you've got greater element of control and ownership than you think you have. And I wish I'd understood that. But I did have, and again, not mentioning any customers, that some customers had me running in circles around them because as a company, I remember people saying these are really important. It's a really important customer. We look after them. And because I was the new person that felt I'd been given a great chance, I needed to prove myself in there. So, of course, I ended up running in circles around some of these customers and then really not looking after everything that I needed to be doing. So I think it happens and it can happen very easily and we can get then very overwhelmed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that recognition that we're professional people.
Yeah.
We've got a very important role. It's a highly valued role, really. And we talked about this on our last episode. And you said at the start, Jayne, about the importance of planning and being organised and stuff, really. One of the things I may upset some people now with this comment, one of the things I hate as a customer, so we all get people trying to sell to us, of course. One of the things I personally hate is, can I come and basically sell to you is what the message is. Here's my Calendly invite. Please book a slot when I'm free. And I found that so patronizing. It's not about when it suits them. It's about when it suits me as well as a customer, really. I think it's having that balance between being organized and structured, but not being so arrogant almost to say that the customers can come to me, really. We've got to have a little bit of a give and take around that, really. Yeah, structure, planning, super important. I think looking back on my own career as well, I think if I had my time again, I'd have slowed down a bit. And I don't just mean with the customers, I mean in my own career. And Pru, you'll know this because you remember we worked together at some stages, but as a younger person, I was so ambitious, so driven, so desperate to get the next job, the big job, to get promoted, to get the bigger car, the bigger salary, the bigger bonus. Sometimes I was perhaps a little bit too fixated on that and not fixated enough on my colleagues and my organisation. And of course, as you get older, your priorities change, don't they? Things that motivate you when you're in your 30s and 40s don't motivate me. Now I'm a little bit older than that, really. So perhaps the importance of just taking stock of where we are and thinking, yes, have a plan for your career, but perhaps not jumping at the first thing that came along like I did too often, as people know me, will be able to tell you.
Me too. Yeah, I wrote down as thinking about this, what we're going to talk about is I wish I'd done more thinking and less doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was always quick to. I'm sure that part of the reason I got the job was my kind of ability to be a little bit impatient and want to make things happen. But looking back, I think I'd also wish I'd carved a bit more time out to think. Yeah. I was really good at doing, which meant that sometimes I repeated the good things, but it also meant because I didn't do enough thinking that I repeated the bad things too, the things that were less optimum. Yeah. And if I'd just had been able to catch my breath occasionally and just think about things, I'd have been dangerous, I'm pretty sure. And I'd have been less stressed. There are moments when I look back on my sales career that were just so stressful for me, so stressful that they were always balanced out by the times that were much more exciting. But if I just thought a bit, it would have been better for sure.
Great points.
Fun fact as well at the end was that the other thing I wished I'd realised is that for every year in sales, you put on 2 pounds. Wait. If someone had told me that at the beginning, I may have got a bit more control over where I stopped for my lunch or grabbed a sandwich because, honestly, I know very few salespeople that hasn't happened to.
No, I agree. I think those, sadly, drive-throughs never were existing, but it was that moment of eating. I wish I'd realised how many suits that I used to wear that I would ruin by trying to eat whilst driving with my sandwiches and a drink balanced on my lap.
So, yeah, great examples. And for me, the importance of having a radio, showing my age, but having a radio with long wave on so you can listen to the test match when you're driving, because the test match was always on long wave. And now, because we've got DAB radio, it's not a problem. But if you hadn't got long wave, you couldn't listen to the test match. And so that was one of the benefits of being on the road, in my experience.
I remember that too. I used to almost I was very cross when they changed when the Archers was broadcast. It shows my age. They used to broadcast it at 1:45, and most of your afternoon appointments started at 2:00. So you get there early and have 15 minutes, but they've moved it. Talking of which, I am off to the cricket next week, Steve. So thank you for reminding me of that. I'm off to a one-day international. Looking forward to it.
That should be nice. One final recommendation from both of you and from me, perhaps, for a new salesperson starting out on their career, listening to this, if they're still with us for as long as to the episode, one recommendation and one bit of sage advice that you'd like to give to a salesperson starting their career right now. Who'd like to go first?
You're going to win some and you're going to lose some.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to win everything. And I think I went out and that was what happened, that enthusiasm. Then you move into different roles and you might be up in against greater competitors or more complexity in the sale. And all of a sudden, I realised that you might get some level of no or a rejection. Be aware that is part of the job. You win some and you lose some. And that's part of the joy and part of the journey of selling. And learn how to pick yourself up if you do lose or if you get a rejection.
Great point.
They don't come as often as the wins, in my experience, but they do happen.
If we won everything, we wouldn't need salespeople, would we, really? And again, of course, we learn from the no's, don't we? We learn from the failures, don't we? Yeah. One from you, Pru?
I think it's on the rejection is what happens in sales, and we just have to learn to deal with it. And it's never personal either, rarely personal. But I think it's the idea that when a customer says no, they rarely, if ever, mean no, never. If I got turned away or turned down or lacked success, and I would almost write them off. I go, they don't like us.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's just not true. It's just not true. So if I'd realised, I think, early on that it was just I got my timing wrong. And sales is the art of timing. Being at the right place at the right time in front of the right person. And I think I would have had the right kind of persistence instead of the wrong kind of persistence.
Love that, yeah. And for me, I think, and probably I did do this, but I'd do it more now if I started again, the importance of always be prospecting, really, always be looking for the next opportunity.
Yeah.
The importance of just keeping my eyes open, asking some questions in the customer. Who else uses these? Who else might want one of those? Anybody else you think I should be talking to? The importance of doing that, really, because there are times in my career when the sales funnel wasn't clean and healthy, just put it that way. And the importance of always be looking for your next sale, your next opportunity, even if things are going fantastically well at the moment, it's super important. So I think for me, that would be the best advice I'd give to anybody starting their sales career right now. And if you are, good luck. It's a great job. And I wish you a long and successful career. Pru, Jayne, thanks so much for your personal thoughts on that one. And that was a slightly different theme for our podcast today, but I hope, dear listener, you found that one useful. We're going to do something different for our next podcast. So we're coming towards the summer holidays now, and we're not going to be producing any shows over August. For our last show in July, what we're going to try and do, if we can get everybody available, is to get the whole team on. So that's going to be a logistical challenge with the software that we use remotely. Pru's holding her heads in her hands right now. But what we thought we would do, again, in a retrospective way, is to look back on the 2 years that we've been doing this podcast now. So we've made getting on for 50 episodes, and many thousands of people have downloaded the show, which we thank you all for doing. We thought we'd look back on what we've learned from podcasting times. Some of us, it was new to us. Some of us have done this a bit more often. What we've learned from podcasting, and also what we want to do with the podcast moving forward. And of course, we'd welcome your thoughts and input on that over the next couple of weeks. And if you have enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe to it in your favorite podcast app. And we'd love you to leave us a review on Apple or Spotify if you have the opportunity. As I said, we'll be back in July with another podcast. Until then, happy selling, and we'll talk to you soon.